All right, welcome to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. And today's white lightning is going to be a bit of a hodgepodge. We've got some follow-up from what we talked about uh last week, and then I've got a rant about this balloon. And then we'll kind of lighten it up with some fitness stuff because last time we talked exercise, health, fitness stuff, I kind of teased lactic acid because I thought that would be interesting to talk about because you've mentioned it, the lactic acid cycle, several times when we've been talking about stuff, and I thought, well, let's take a deeper dive into that. So we'll kind of finish up with that.
Yeah, and so the cleanup from last week is not really cleanup, just further information on one, and then the second topic, the controversial topic. I did want to add something because you brought up Saul Alinsky, and I wanted to say it in the conversation, but we ranted too long and it left my
Hmm.
mind, and then came back at the middle of the night. So, but that we talked about the Wegovy drug, the semaglutide. So we beat Rogan to it. Yay. Rogan and Lex were talking about it. I don't know when he was on there, but I was listening to it yesterday and today. And then Jamie brought up further research on it. And apparently they've done some longitudinal studies, and a shit ton of the weight you lose is actually muscle mass, bone mass, and connective tissue, as well
Ooh.
as the fat. So trade-offs, man. The human body is complex. You can't just throw a pill at it, man. And
Hmm.
then they compared it to some athlete studies with weight loss and exercise, and trying to get as optimal. Remember, we use the word optimal.
Yeah.
And a lot of these successful ones where they lost almost 100% of the weight loss was fat. Of course, they're slower, long, slow process diets
Hmm.
with training, including resistance training, which stimulates your body, which we'll get to a little bit with lactic acid here, to preserve muscle mass, if not gain it. All the things that stimulate you to gain muscle mass in a calorie deficit, it actually still gives the signal that we need that muscle. So your body will pull caloric energy from other places first. Protein is costly to use, and if you have a signal that says save it, your body is more likely to pull from your fat stores than it is from your protein stores. If you're not overly muscled, this does not replicate in bodybuilder studies because they are overly muscled. Uh, but uh, but yeah, so long, slow plus resistance training optimally better. And I want to see those studies where they said even these people couldn't lose weight with optimal exercise and diet. I want to see a replication study where you took the exact same training modalities and diet modalities that were successful in those people on the target population, and tell me what happens. That's
Hmm.
how you do science. This worked here. This didn't work here. Well, what happens if we take the things that worked here and put it on the different population that we say can't lose weight? That's
Yeah.
how you do it. You don't just make up shit and say it doesn't work.
Well, and that's one of the things we pointed out with you know, uh, the diet and exercise didn't work for these people. Okay, well, what was the diet and what was the exercise?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What
Because
what define optimal?
hmm
Because there's a lot of individuality, there's specificity, and it's we already know the RDA is shit. So sorry for my cussing today, but this is a passionate topic for me.
yeah.
Uh, and I listened to Dr. Stanford's earlier work. She's got her Harvard bio has a list of all her stuff, and I just click through interviews, papers, blog posts, everything. Up until about 2017, she was spot on. She's saying the exact same things we are to this day.
Hmm.
And then something happened around 2017. Oh, they started funding her. We brought up her funding chart. That all started in 2016. So I guess the carryover was the material released would be released in 2017. Man, power corrupts, money corrupts, and an otherwise great mind was corrupted. Which
Hmm.
which is sad because she knows what she's doing. She knows what she's
Yeah.
saying on 60 Minutes is bull crap, and it's going to hurt a lot of people because obesity related illness is one of the number one. This time of day, people walk around the lake with their dogs. I wish they would just stay outside and wait for them instead of coming in and then barking their way out, and then coming in and then barking their way out. So apologize for that, people. It was very loud in my ear. I hope it's not as loud in whoever's listening to this. All
Sounded like a
Scott.
car wreck in your living room is what it sounded like.
So yeah, this is it's disappointing to me. Yes, I can be made to say a few things. I could advertise for somebody if they gave me some money. If I was to say one Greek yogurt, Oikos 000, was better than Kroger brand, well, that's within the realm of, yeah, money can convince you because it's an opinion anyways.
Mm-hmm.
And whoever's that's advertising, it's marketing at that point, and you try to get people to sell your stuff, and as long as it doesn't compromise something deep down in your soul, right, it's okay. It's just an opinion, it's just an advertisement. But to say something like this that has the nation's health, our dietary guidelines are partly being formulated by this person. The new
Mm-hmm.
2025 guidelines that come out are going to be formulated by someone who says diet doesn't matter.
Well, we ranted about this a while back when we talked about where the low fat, the saturated fat and heart, the Mediterranean diet stuff came from. And we brought up that, gee, is it just a coincidence that the base of the old food pyramid was grains when agribusiness is big business and huge lobbying, and a major part of that is the fact that the Iowa caucus is the first part of the presidential primary season. Gee, is that just an accident?
Or the accident that was levying sugar tariffs on imported sugar at the same time high fructose corn syrup was being pimped as the good alternative.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well,
it's
that was twofold, because the sugar tariffs were to protect the handful of sugarcane producers in America, and then the added bonus of, and we get more of this. We get more of a market for this substitute because we're not bringing in the cane sugar anymore. And there have been numerous studies that aren't necessarily convincing, but are worrying about what high fructose corn syrup does to your body in place of cane sugar.
Well, at the very least, it's the same caloric intake without the stop gap that with real sugar you have, where you get satiated from it. So you can just you can have sodas till morning till evening till you go to bed without ever feeling satisfied.
Yeah.
But if you had real sugar products, eventually it's slower than with fats, but your body hits that point where you're just like, oh, that's too much. There's a slight delay in it, which sucks because you can still overeat. But when it happens, and you're just like, oh, that
Yeah, and
donut
even
was too
thinking it,
rich. Yeah.
and then even thinking about it makes you go, no, I don't,
Mm-hmm.
no more.
So,
Okay, so
well, let me do the second part, because we
okay.
also talked about the couple that adopted the child.
Oh yeah.
And you had brought up Saul Alinsky, and I
Mm-hmm.
had a thought on that, and it left before we finished the conversation. I should have just interjected and interrupted you, but I do want to kind of beg the right side of the aisle, the reactionary to this kind of thing side of the aisle. Uh, just a reminder: remember, there are people on that side that are doing things just for the reaction.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
there are people. The people themselves were activists. They you just like serial killers advertise to the cops just to get away with stuff and poke them and poke the bear.
Mm-hmm.
These were sadistic people, and they were activists. The reaction there, the LGBTQ activist community, not the community itself, the activist portion of that community, is chomping at the bit for a gay, lesbian, trans George Floyd.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to get one. I'm sorry that this is your prediction. This isn't a wish. This is your prediction, because there are enough conservatives with guns, and you're dealing with their children.
Mm-hmm.
It's the fact that hasn't happened yet is a testament to the human resolve to control yourself.
Uh, Yeah, I'd forgotten about that and didn't know we were going down this route. I need to go do some digging. There have been some people that have done some investigative journalisming and connecting the dots, and these family-friendly drag shows, these aren't spontaneous, you know, outpourings of this LGBTQAI plus um inclusion and acceptance. There's a national organization behind it, and it is coordinated, and they have a system, they have a method that what they are trying to do is they advertise these family-friendly drag shows in conservative places. That's why they keep doing this in Texas and places like that, that to provoke a reaction. And what they'll do is they'll beforehand and afterwards they talk about, you know, the inclusion aspect of it, and it was all, it was all good fun, it was kid friendly, it was family friendly. And then you'll actually see pictures and video of what is taking place there, and people there should be arrested because it is blatantly sexual in front of children. And they are wanting to get protesters there and provoke a reaction with what they're doing, and then just talk about the bookends and not talk about what actually happened. Just talk about what they advertised, what they said was going to happen, and then after the fact say, see, these are all just bigots, and
Well,
let's just
and
ignore what actually happened.
another caution too, a lot of this is internet flame war type tactics. How many of those ultra conservative reactions were actually developed by the people who want the reaction? Basically pouring gasoline on the fire with fake accounts, with remember, the top 21 religious accounts on Facebook, 19 of them were Russian bots. So how many of those are reaction-based groups or reaction-based followings?
Yeah, remember that the militia group that plotted to abduct the governor in Michigan, literally more than half were federal agents or informants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not even talking about on the government level, though. I'm talking
Hmm.
about on the activist level.
Yeah, but if it's happening there, you don't think it's
Yeah.
happening on the activist
Well, and
side?
how, and with the way Twitter is and Facebook and everything, how easy would it be? You know, I can make a Jesus Saves account in 20 minutes and
Hmm.
have it look legitimate. Just get a bunch of motivational quotes with halos in the background, and steal a bunch of memes and just flame them on there and start doing one, 5 a day, because these things just spam, spam, spam.
And slowly start escalating,
Yeah.
you know, what's being said. Yeah.
Yeah,
I hate
this
everything.
is one thing Lex talked about. So to add, I already had this thought, but he was talking about these internet spaces. He said I could take over a whole space with maybe 10 bots. With GPT, 10 bots, and in about 10 minutes a day.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and this is something we mentioned way back when we were first starting, because, and this is another one of those, it just blipped and was gone, was the admission, I believe it was a whistleblower, wasn't it, that um that showed the documentation that Facebook knew exactly how harmful uh all the negative side of social media could be, but also how
Mm.
addictive it was, and so they leaned into it.
Wasn't really a whistleblower. They published the studies.
Oh, they published the studies.
Yeah.
I thought it was someone who was talking about I thought there was stuff that came out about the internal
Yeah, but
dialogue.
that was, remember, I was talking about planning things on the other side. That person came out and was very specifically trying to get government regulation and
Hmm.
Section 230 removal. She was, in essence, a plant for Facebook because they want
Yes.
that.
Yes.
Then with heavier regulation, no new company could come up and compete.
Yeah, there's a reason that doesn't face is Facebook the one who owns Instagram, or is it Google now?
Meta, so Facebook.
Meta. Okay. I mean, there's a reason they keep buying these things,
Yeah.
because they don't want the new thing to come along. And uh if you can get the government to help you, for crying out loud, this was what I was ranting about the I brain farted. What was it? FTX? Is that the crypto thing?
Yeah, yeah.
So he's creating this scheme, this basically this pump and dump fake financial scheme, all the while going in to government institutions and saying crypto needs to be heavily regulated. And gee, it just so happens that I'm going to benefit from that.
Hmm.
Yeah, just so happens.
Well, and this is part of the. I think this might be one of the bigger parts of the fix that nobody's talking about. I haven't heard anybody say this out loud, so let me be the first on the web to say it if it is. But these companies, what they did was they were very open ended and not political and not censorious and basically a free form. They were what we wanted them to be for so long until they became megaliths, and then they changed everything.
Yeah.
It was after they were the position where nothing can really compete with us at this point. So now we're going to go ahead and do what we want to do. And the fix might be just force them to honor their original terms of service. No updates with legal limits. Like say they added something that was we could censor something that's breaking the law. That's fine. But within just make them honor with all of their members the original terms of service that were there when we all signed up. None of these updates to include misinformation, which is guided from the government or anything. Original terms of service, the Twitter we all liked, the Facebook we all liked, the MySpace we all liked. If that still exists, you can go find your old account. And it
Yeah,
still runs as slow as ever, which is, I think, why it got knocked out of the market, because
yeah,
all the bells and whistles they tried to put in made it run really slow.
yeah.
But yeah, just make them honor their original terms of service. That's it. And it
Simple.
becomes the free market again
Yeah,
with the checks and balances for like child porn and stuff like that.
but you can't hide loopholes and special deals in something simple.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you need the 1,000-page bills, because it's easy to hide things in there. All right. Speaking of hiding things in plain sight, this actually kind of ties into my rant about this stupid balloon. Here, pay attention to the balloon like a 4-year-old at the carnival. This is actually I have this long piece. I'm gonna have to resist the urge to read the whole thing because it's 23 pages long and it's great. The whole thing is great. And there are definitely indictments of the left and the right here. And this is what is so infuriating about the reaction to this stupid balloon is, all right, Republicans who are pontificating, how long have you been in power and how much have you actually done to curb China's growing technological power and influence and military and in espionage strength? How much have you actually done and how much have you been, on the grift? And on the left now they're the spin afterwards was, oh, there were 3 times that this happened during the Trump administration. All these officials immediately came out and said, no, this never happened. And it didn't matter because it was Trump. Shut up. Stop making everything about Trump. The other thing that is so astounding about this incident is how blatant it was. A balloon. China has satellite. Now their space industry is very fledgling, but they have long had tendrils of espionage. I mean, for crying out loud, they have a whole section of the People's Liberation Army is wholly dedicated to industrial espionage and then disseminating that to domestic business. So it's not just corporate espionage that is China stealing our technology and then selling it back to us. It is in cooperation with their military complex. In other words, they wanted this to be seen. Otherwise, why would they do it? Because there's no way you don't see this. Somebody with a telescope could have seen this, right? It it isn't a spy satellite, you know, gathering information while it looks like a telecoms. This is not some asset in a think tank feeding you information. They wanted this to be seen. This was a flex.
Mhm.
This was a we own you, and you're not going to do anything about it. The other worry here that I haven't heard talked about is what if this was a dry run for an EMP attack? Because not only, I mean, the focus, and rightly so, is on the path this took, because there aren't a lot of people in Montana and the Dakotas, but what are there a lot of? Do you know?
It's towers of some kind, right?
Nuclear silos.
Nuclear silos, yeah, and
That
and then the communications towers that connect them, which are all made with Chinese parts.
yeah,
I saw
there's that.
what I'm trying to remember his name. He was CIA guy. He was on Rogan about a year ago talking about this, and he said that they've slowly been replacing these parts, but it was already so ingrained by the time someone spoke up and was like, this can be a problem." That
Yeah, yeah. Taiwan found this out recently because um a contractor who had provided parts for part of their missile defense system, kind of important for Taiwan, had subcontracted to a Chinese company. And they didn't know it at the time. They didn't purposely use Chinese parts, but they were not happy when they found out. Um, so our nuclear deterrent is primarily along the Canadian border because, I'm sorry, flat earthers, that's the shortest path over to the Soviet Union. Um, so that part is important because obviously they're gathering all kinds of intelligence on our nuclear deterrent. All right, well, the other danger here is, and people have talked about this for a long time, this isn't, you know, a new idea I just had, is you can have a nuclear attack that isn't a nuclear attack like you think. If you detonate a nuclear bomb in high altitude, you don't kill anybody with the nuclear blast, but you set off an EMP that fries all electronic equipment in a very large area. And the way our grid is set up, if you blow out a huge section of the electrical grid, the whole grid goes down.
okay, so you don't have to apologize to flat earthers because according to their model, it still is the shortest distance.
Ah, okay. I apologize. I apologize. You've already got it all figured out. My bad. My bad. All right.
I was wanting to say I had seen that map before, so I was like, I think it still is actually the shortest.
The one I saw was a little different. It was a meme of how the dinosaurs died, and it was a flat Earth meteor comes down, hits it, and it wobbles like a plate, and the dinosaurs go flying off into space. Sure, that's accurate.
Oh,
Anywho,
oh, I might have our meme for this one just because of this one little blurb. Keep going.
all right. So annoyingly though, this isn't new, and it is entirely bipartisan. All right, so I actually I think I sent this to you like a year ago. Um, I've been wanting to talk about this for a while because China stuff pops up so frequently, and it's fitting that now, you know, something in the news makes it very pertinent. And so this is by a guy named Lee Smith, columnist. This is from Tablet Magazine, February 3rd, 2021. The 30 Tyrants. In Chapter 5 of The Prince, Niccolo Machiavelli describes three options for how a conquering power might best treat those it has defeated in war. The first is to ruin them. The second is to rule directly. The third is to create, quote, therein a state of the few which might keep it friendly to you, unquote. The example Machiavelli gives of the last is the friendly government Sparta established in Athens upon defeating it after 27 years of war in 404 BC. For the upper caste of an Athenian elite already contemptuous of democracy, the city's defeat in the Peloponnesian War confirmed that Sparta's system was preferable. It was a high-spirited military aristocracy ruling over a permanent servant class, the Helots, who were periodically slaughtered to condition them to accept their subhuman status. Athenian democracy, by contrast, gave too much power to the lowborn. The pro-Sparta oligarchy used their patron's victory to undo the rights of citizens and settle scores with their domestic rivals, exiling and executing them and confiscating their wealth. The Athenian government, disloyal to Athens' laws and contemptuous of its tradition, was known as the 30 Tyrants, and understanding its role and function helps explain what's happening in America today. He then goes,
That's interesting because we were kind of a little bit more on that path till the latest zero COVID events in China, where everybody was looking at the China model and saying, "Oh, it's so much better, so much better," and then they got hit and they couldn't stop it, and people kind of pulled back from that. So luckily, there was a little bit of it breaking before it was more mainstream here.
my worry is that they're not pulling back from it. It's that they've already created the domestic and international institutions to replicate it with their own tweaks added to it. You know, the WEF crowd and their model of how things should work. They've already got their tendrils in everything. And so my worry is they're pulling back from the Chinese model because now they have their own model, which was let's take this idea, but then tweak it to make it more palatable for the West. And he goes into the background of this with how Thomas Friedman, a far lefty economist who writes for the New York Times, had in 2011 written an article about how the big money elite financier types had during the Obama administration shifted to the Democratic Party. As he says, in principle, they quoting a financier trade consultant, in principle, they have left the party, leaving behind not a pragmatic coalition, but a group of ideological naysayers. And it was really all about China, and the ties to China, because that is where there was tons of money to be made. And on the right, they were sold this bill of goods because globalism, free trade, free trade, free trade. You know, that is the mantra, or has been the mantra, of the Republican Party forever, using you know, the likes of Sol and the other Friedman, going back for decades. But it was a bill of goods because it was never free trade, and it ignored the fact that China uses literal slave labor. That's one of the ways they are able to undercut manufacturing around the world. And it is, and then he goes a little bit into where Trump comes in here. And this was to, I don't know how accurate this is, but in Smith's estimation, this was a loose coalition for a couple of decades. You know, basically since the Clinton administration had started to accelerate the economic ties with China. So this was a loose coalition of government and business whose interests aligned in China. And then Trump comes along and they have to coalesce because he's a clear threat. And I've talked about this before, is that one of the only core principles Trump has, and I've even brought up, you know, way back, I brought up links going back even into the 80s, and it is one of the uh, consistent elements of Trump is our us getting screwed uh, by China. And you know, before China became the big deal, it was other bad guys, but it was us getting screwed in trade deals. That was his one consistent element, especially when it came to political ideas that you could go back decades and hear him talking about. So this was a clear threat to the free money that China was handing out to this, in Smith's estimation, a loose coalition of business and government. And he uses as the example the strange bedfellows of LeBron James and
Yeah,
Apple
I was just
CEO
reading
Tim
that part.
Cook.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these are strange bedfellows, but uh, as he points out, the NBA had a $1.5 billion contract with digital service provider Tencent, and Tim Cook, obviously, Apple products are made in China. So they want to protect this connection.
To add to that, from minerals mined in the Congo, mines owned by the Chinese government,
Mm-hmm.
using virtual slave labor in the Congo. I threw a hipster off the other day. They said, "Oh, you should," because we're talking about getting a new car, right? Because I had to get a new car because for those that watch, mine was stolen. Like, you should switch to EV. You should go Tesla or something. And I was like, first of all, can't afford that. But second of all, no, I can't in good conscience do that because I don't support slave labor. The average car battery in one of those vehicles is about 1,000 iPhones worth of battery. And the up in market that has been, the spike in the market has really encouraged these mines to expand beyond the capacity of the people working in them, who are dying because cobalt is toxic, and they're down there with a
Yep.
shovel and a pickaxe mining it out with their bare hands as children and women and as a family. It's a family activity there in the Congo because you need the whole family working on the wage they make just to live.
It's double slave labor because they use proxy slave labor to mine the rare earth minerals that you need for not just the electric vehicle batteries, but also all those solar panels. Every week I get someone calling or knocking on my door trying to sell me solar panels. So you need the rare earth minerals to make them, and then a giant chunk of the market share of these electric vehicle batteries and solar panels are manufactured in Xinjiang. So you have the proxy slave labor to mine the rare earths, and then you have the direct slave labor of the Uyghur concentration camps where these things are actually made.
Yeah. So we're, when we've done a whole episode, direct your compassion or your empathy and compassion, and there are trade-offs just like everything else. Well, you know what? Climate change is real, and we do have an impact on it. But at the same time, we're not all going to die by 2030. And I oppose slave labor. I oppose that first. So, choose your compassion. If you want to be an environmentalist, don't think you're morally above me
Mhm.
because I'm not as much so as you.
Or I'm not in the same way you are.
Yeah, exactly. That's a better way of saying it because I care. We've talked about it. I believe local solutions are the current answer. I think we skipped a step. We should, well, although Toyota's apparently doing it. They've made the Tundra's hybrids after 2022, which kind of sucks because they're no longer the badass truck they were. But at the same time, we do have to do something. Hybrid's the next step. I think we should have done that. Uh, but yeah, this whole, we need to cut all CO2 by 2030 or we're all going to die. No, you're an idiot. Sorry.
Yeah, go watch Constantine before the Oxford Debating Society. Go
Yeah, that
watch
was a
his
great
viral clip.
speech. That was
That's
a great
great.
speech.
All
Yeah.
right, so here he calls out specific people about what's going on.
Oh, let me show my meme real quick before it becomes old because you talked about dinosaurs.
But
Sorry. Got to inject some humor. Very dark humor.
That's awesome. Oh, back to the depressing stuff.
Oh,
All right.
yeah. For those that like cyanide and happiness, you may have noticed Heath is definitely cyanide and I'm happiness.
Yeah. Because of Trump's pressure on the Americans who benefited extravagantly from the US-China relationship, these strange bedfellows acquired what Marxists call class consciousness and joined together to fight back, further cementing their relationship with their Chinese patrons. United now, these disparate American institutions lost any sense of circumspection or shame about cashing checks from the Chinese Communist Party, no matter what horrors the CCP visited on the prisoners of its slave labor camps, and no matter what threat Chinese spy services and the People's Liberation Army might pose to national security. Think tanks and research institutions like the Atlantic Council, the Center for American Progress, the East-West Institute, the Carter Center, the Carnegie Endowment for the International Peace, Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, and others gorged themselves on Chinese money. The world-famous Brookings Institution had no scruples about publishing a report funded by Chinese telecom company Huawei that praised Huawei technology. The billions that
That's the
China gave.
company that was supplying communications materials for our nuclear centers.
Yep,
As soon as you said it, that popped right back in my head.
yep,
Yeah.
yep, yep, yep. The billions that China gave to major American research universities, like 58 million to Stanford, alarmed U.S. law enforcement, which warned of Chinese counterintelligence efforts to steal sensitive research. But the schools and their name faculty were, in fact, in the business of selling that research, much of it paid for directly by the U.S. government, which is why Harvard and Yale, among other big-name schools, appear to have systematically underreported the large amounts that China had gifted them.
Hmm. Almost like transparency would help.
Mhm. And this is where it starts to come together with what we were talking about to begin with. And also, for all he talked a big game, what did he actually do? But if Donald Trump saw decoupling the United States from China as a way to dismantle the oligarchy that hated him and sent American jobs abroad, he couldn't follow through on the vision. After correctly identifying the sources of corruption in our elite, the reasons for the impoverishment of the middle class, and the threats foreign and domestic to our peace, he failed to staff and prepare to win the war he asked Americans to elect him to fight. And because it was true that China was the source of the China class's power, the novel coronavirus coming out of Wuhan became the platform for its coup de grace. So Americans became prey to an anti-democratic elite that used the coronavirus to demoralize them, lay waste to small businesses, leave them vulnerable to rioters who are free to steal, burn, and kill, keep their children from school and dying from the last embrace of their loved ones, and desecrate American history, culture, and society, and defame the country as systemically racist in order to furnish the predicate for why ordinary Americans, in fact, deserved the hell that the elite's private and public sector proxies had already prepared for them. I do think that's an important point, and I don't know if you saw there is a clip that went viral from the World Economic Forum's latest confab of John Kerry talking about how isn't it great that we special people have been chosen, elected, stepped forward to save the world. That's what they think of themselves. And thus that's what they think of you. This is an aristocracy, and we are its serfs. Um,
And
again,
this is where we look at balance too, because the populist movement was needed. The problem is there are downfalls to it as well.
mhm,
And so as someone who supported the direction, oof, a lot of light real quick, supported the direction it started to go, you also have to look at the bottom of the slope.
yep,
And then the populist movements become mob rule, which in turn become authoritarian governments because you have to get the mob back in check. So keep that in mind as we go forward because we needed the populist movement, but we don't want to be completely populist.
mhm. And part of that, the next bit I had was again on the right. I don't know if you've ever heard of Francis Fukuyama. He wrote
The
a pretty
name sounds
yeah.
familiar.
Back in 1992, he wrote a pretty influential book called The End of History. Um, that he saw the end of the Cold War as the vindication of the small L liberal democracy Western model of life, and that going forward, um, the how does Smith put it? He believed that the end of the nearly half century of long superpower standoff, the historical dialectic pitting conflicting political models against each other, had been resolved. It wasn't. So there's all the strain of utopianism on both the left and the right. And so what the people on the right that said liberal democracy has won, you know, free trade and human rights for everybody, and they sold that bill of goods to their constituents. The huge problem with it is it denied human nature. That's the failing of both the leftist and rightist utopians, is the reason it's a utopia, which means impossible, is because it denies human nature. It it was always going to shift somehow. There was always going to be another dialectic. There was always going to be another conflict because that's human nature.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Quoting again from him, because so he bashes the right, and now here comes the left again. Just after defeating communism in the Soviet Union, America breathed new life into the Communist Party that survived. And instead of Western democratic principles transforming the CCP, the American establishment acquired a taste for Eastern techno-autocracy. Tech became the anchor of the US-China relationship, with CCP funding driving Silicon Valley startups, thanks largely to the efforts of Dianne Feinstein, who, after Kissinger, became the second most influential official driving the US-CCP relationship for the next 20 years. In 1978, as the newly elected mayor of San Francisco, Feinstein befriended Jiang Zemin, then the mayor of Shanghai, and eventually president of China. As mayor of America's tech epicenter, her ties to China helped the growing sector attract Chinese investment and made the state the world's third largest economy. Her alliance with Zhang also helped her invest her husband, Richard Blum, a wealthy man. As senator, she pushed for permanent most favored nation trade status for China by rationalizing China's human rights violations, while her friend Zhang consolidated his power and became the Communist Party's general secretary by sending tanks into Tiananmen Square. Feinstein defended him. China had no local police, Feinstein said that Zhang had told her, hence the tanks, the senator from California reassuringly explained. But that's the past. One learns from the past. You don't repeat it. I think China has learned a lesson. It certainly did, but not the lesson you thought.
They learned they can create a federal police state if you get rid of the local police state. Defund police.
Mm-hmm. Well, and they also learned that you can pay off the West. They will talk a big game about human rights, but if you pay off the people in power, if you pay off the elites and they become part of your circle, they won't actually do anything about it. Hence, we go from sending in tanks to kill thousands to harvesting the organs of tens of thousands to sell on the black market and locking up millions in re-education, forced labor gulags. He also has a big part in here about how this isn't limited to politicians, that Chinese influence and money actually connects into the CIA. He cites a former Obama administration intelligence official here who through the 1980s, people who advanced the interests of foreign powers whose ideas were inimical to Republican form of government were ostracized. But with the advent of globalism, they made excuses for China, even bending the intelligence to fit their preferences. During the Bush and Obama years, the standard assessment was that the Chinese have no desire to build a blue water navy. It was inconvenient to their view. China now has a third aircraft carrier in production. And then he ties it into what happened in Wuhan and with COVID. And here is the lesson they learned from Tiananmen Square is you have to crush these things before they can spread. And again, if you pay off the elites in the West, they'll talk a big game, but they won't actually do anything about human rights. We have captured them because their business is so integrated into ours, they can't pull away. Now, remember, in late summer of 2019, the trade war that Trump had started with China that was roundly criticized by both left and right because big money was there, was actually starting to work. That big businesses like Amazon, Microsoft, and Alphabet said they were planning to move some of their manufacturing elsewhere. It was at exactly this same moment in late June and early July of 2019 that the residents of Wuhan began to fill the streets, angry that officials responsible for the health and prosperity of the city's 11 million people had betrayed them. They were sick and feared getting sicker. The elderly gasped for breath. Marchers held up banners saying, "We don't want to be poisoned. We just need a breath of fresh air." Parents worried for their children's lives. There was fear that the ill had suffered permanent damage to their immune and nervous systems. Authorities censored social media accounts, photos and videos of the protests, and undercover policemen watched for troublemakers and detained the most vocal. With businesses forced shut, there was nowhere for protesters to hide. Some were carted off in vans. They'd been warned by the authorities. Public security organizations will resolutely crack down on illegal criminal acts such as malicious incitement and provocation. What sent the residents of Wuhan to the streets at this time wasn't COVID-19, which wouldn't begin to spread until the winter. In the early summer of 2019, what threatened public health in Wuhan was the plague of air pollution. This is a hitherto untold part of the story of America's ghastly last year. To deal with the mounds of garbage poisoning the atmosphere, authorities planned to build a waste incineration plant, a plan that rightly alarmed the people who lived there. In 2013, 5 incineration plants in Wuhan were found to emit dangerous pollutants. Other cities had similarly taken to the streets to protest against air pollution. Xiamen in 2007, Shanghai, Chengdu, Chengyin, each time sending waves of panic through the CCP leadership, which was fearful of the slightest echo of the 1989 pro-democracy protests in Tiananmen Square and of the prospect of unruly democracy protests in Hong Kong making their way to the mainland and igniting a popular brushfire. What if unrest spread from one city to the next, with the entire country, 1.4 billion people, eventually spinning out of control? So what do? You control information and you lock down the populace. Does this sound familiar?
Just a wee bit.
And so then he goes on for several pages tying this all together of, is it an accident? Is it just a coincidence that these methods that China had used, and he cites the dates of these protests that came about from things like environmental damage that was sickening the population. They use the exact same tactics for COVID-19. And then those tactics were adopted by the West.
Trying to think where I'm going to go with this, because I think let me just cue something for I think next time. So here's the homework for anybody watching. And for oh dang it, where did it go? Okay, this is a here we go. I just need to move myself X out of that. There we go. Little Substack from this guy Gerwinder. TikTok, the new kind of super weapon. Mm-hmm. So now we're diving into, well, how does all of this affect us? And we everybody if you're informed, if you're watching this, you're probably kind of informed in this area. The fight around, well, China banned their own product in their own country, and they limit this and limit that, and here it's just wide open. Well, not only does this article go into the physiological effects of something like TikTok, which is pretty disturbing, including loss of gray matter in your brain, but the beliefs, and this is what made me think of it, the beliefs of the people in charge in the CCP towards the West, and how it reinforces their view on Western liberalism and capitalism, because in our freedom seeking, we are completely vulnerable to this weapon. And it's almost like an FU in two ways. It's, we're going to mess with your young people, but then we're also going to use the effects of that to expand our own authoritarian state, because this is what's good for you. And when things make money, the bad thing tends to win, because we're reactionary beasts in a lot of ways. So
let me kind of wrap up this article so we can move on to lighter things. But he he makes an interesting point here about why did the media in lockstep go so hard against Trump? Did they want Biden to win? Sure, but
why was he the existential threat that Sam Harris says he
exactly
was? Yeah.
And was Biden that important? No, it wasn't just that. And why did they go, especially now? And remember, Lee Smith is writing this back in February of 2021, and look how much was suspected has now been confirmed with all the Twitter files of the suppression of information. Exactly what China was doing. The suppression of information to push the narrative. Remember how quickly the lab leak idea popped up, and then how quickly it was suppressed. Okay, why? As he says here, the key fact is this: in legitimizing CCP narratives, the media covers not primarily for China, but for the American class that draws its power, wealth, and prestige from China. No, Beijing isn't the bad guy here. It's a responsible international stakeholder. In fact, we should follow China's lead. And by March, with Trump's initial acquiescence, American officials imposed the same repressive measures on Americans used by dictatorial powers throughout history to silence their own people. Eventually, the pro-China oligarchy would come to see the full range of benefits the lockdown afforded. Lockdowns made leading oligarchs richer, $85 billion richer in the case of Bezos alone, while impoverishing Trump's small business base. In imposing unconstitutional regulations by fiat, city and state authorities normalized autocracy. And not least, lockdowns gave the American establishment a plausible reason to give its chosen candidate the nomination after barely 1/3 of the delegates had chosen, and then keep him stashed away in his basement for the duration of the presidential campaign. And yet, in a sense, Joe Biden really did represent a return to normalcy in the decades-long course of U.S.-China relations. Do you remember when a video began to circulate purporting to show a public speech given by the head of a Chinese think tank? This was a couple years ago. It was right after the election, I think it was. Yeah, because he was talking about so he cites this here about how this professor, this think tank guy, was talking about how for decades we, China, were able to handle the US, as he put it. Why? Quote, because we had people up there in America's core circle of power. We have some old friends. The appreciative crowd laughed along with him. During the last 3 or 4 decades, he continued, we took advantage of America's core circle. As I said, Wall Street has a very profound influence. We used to rely heavily on them. Problem is, they have been declining since 2008. Most importantly, after 2016, Wall Street couldn't control Trump. In the US-China trade war, they tried to help. My friends in the US told me that they tried to help, but they couldn't. Now with Biden winning the election, the traditional elites, political elites, the establishment, they have a very close relationship with Wall Street.
Yep. And to tie this into many episodes we've done, this is why people like Kaepernick are so important, because it never was about racism. It was always about controlling the public.
Yeah. And back to the balloon. Look at the balloon. Look at the balloon. No. Let's talk about what the balloon represents. Let's talk about how we got here. You know, and he ends the article with this long list of incoming Biden administration officials, again, written in February 21, that have political and financial ties to China, including uh, military and intelligence officials. He also cites a bunch from the outgoing Trump administration that had them too.
Yeah.
And that's how we got here.
That's how we got here.
That's also why there's not any real progress being made, because we need to start using that term more, because it's been being used a lot lately in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Oligarchs. We have our own. The only difference is the oligarchs of Russia are not basically, they are organized crime heads that also have legitimate businesses. Our oligarchs act like organized crime heads, but do everything legally, not necessarily ethically, but they use the levers of power to do everything above board.
I'm trying not to be cynical here, but I think there's an element of realism to what I'm going to say. You said do everything legally. I'm sorry. Do you think Bill Gates has never had anybody killed? You think the head of Nike has never got a whiff of a whistleblower and had something bad happen?
Before the last couple of years, I would have said you're being crazy. I I mean, anything's possible now. It's hard to, all the crazy tinfoil hat, crazy right people who talked about, there you can go and you can find lists online of people who are convinced and have evidence of the people the Clintons have had killed.
Well, look at this crypto thing. After FTX went down, and Bankman-Fried was just basically like what he is, and an autistic genius, just speaking his mind to reporters and giving the whole spiel, thinking he was doing the right thing. How many of these top level crypto guys are drowning in the Bahamas by accident? I mean, they're
Weren't there
even
like
doing it the same way.
3 or 4 millionaire billionaire just mysteriously died all within
Yeah,
the
yeah.
span of a couple of
Accident,
months?
boating accident.
Yeah, all within the span of a couple of months. And again, like the Vegas shooter, like you know, pick your thing. It just, oh, this happened, and then now it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And no follow-up, not another peep, not a, well, this is what happened.
No, I doubt that these top oligarchs in our country are holding the gun and pulling the trigger, but there are people within their organization that know what needs to be done, and they don't even have to give the specific order for that thing to be
Yeah,
done.
how much of it could be like King what's his bucket? I think it was Henry, one of the Henrys, who just shouted out, "Will no one rid me of this pesky bishop?" And so three knights said, "Okay," and they went and they hacked the Bishop of Canterbury to death in his cathedral. It That seems perfectly plausible. Of, man, I wish I didn't have to deal with this guy, and someone gets it taken care of.
There's a local guy in our area, and I'm not going to name names because I don't like lawsuits, but he was in a giant federal scam, and they don't indict you unless they already have the evidence. And all the charges ended up being dropped, and people were missing. So it's even in your local area, you can find it if you look hard enough. Luckily, I think this guy's finally going to go down, and it's not Me Too. It's actual legit people, but it's the nature of the times works in the benefit as well as the negative.
Hmm.
So, but yeah, these people are everywhere. They're typically in high power positions because sometimes that's what it takes to get there.
Hmm.
And it's not, I don't think it's being cynical to say that there's probably a higher percentage of that happening at that level than there is at our level.
Which is why we have griped about local power and getting involved locally. Pay attention. Who's your sheriff? Figure out who your sheriff is and if he's a good guy or not. Figure out who your school board and city council representatives are and figure out if there's someone good or not. And then put pressure on them to exert authority, proper authority locally so that we can blunt the authority because you're not gonna change this ship, right? This is the Titanic headed towards the iceberg, and you're not gonna move it because that was one of the points of bringing up that article is that look how entrenched this is, and yes, it's depressing. But it should also focus us on what can actually be done. Stop banging your head against the wall with federal politics, with the Democrat Republican team jersey, because in a lot of ways it's the same damn thing, and focus locally. And on that
I
note,
think it's a bit of both. You
a
do
bit
have
of,
to
I
take it.
mean,
Yeah.
that's a good point. Don't ignore the federal, but don't put so much of your effort in there and don't think because I voted for this guy for federal office, I've done my part and now I'm done. No, 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 no,
The difficulty on the local level is getting the information you just talked about is really difficult, even in the social media age.
no. Hmm.
Because just researching for our last little local elections, there's just so little information. Even looking for interviews with these people or trolling their social media sites to see what they believe, it's difficult.
Hmm. Hmm. All right. Well, on that note, Grandpa has to pee, and then we'll shift topics to something less depressing.
Perfect.
All right, Professor Sam, take it away.
Well, I kind of want to get an idea of what direction we're supposed to go because I did the preliminary stuff and I think it's going to be relevant no matter what. But you
Hmm.
said you wanted to talk about lactic acid because of something Malone said.
No, it just reminded me because I
Okay.
teased it a week or a couple weeks ago, and then I was reminded of it with Dr. Malone talking to Dan Bongino on his podcast Friday, and he'd said something that kind of caught my ear because this was the most, and I'm going to assume he knows the cycle and how it works, and he was just using shorthand. But as you know, I hate the witchcraft. But the most interesting part to me was the lactic acid cycle because when we were growing up, we were taught the reason your muscles burn is the buildup of lactic acid, which made a kind of sense because it's acid. So that's
Mhm.
why your muscles are burning. And then it turns out, well, that's probably not true.
Well,
That
it's true and not true at the
mhm,
same
it
time.
it's not the acid itself. It is
Well,
part of what is happening. Is that a better way to?
lactate lowers the pH of the blood around it, right? So
Mhm,
if we're looking at glucose going into the blood, so now we're talking anaerobic activity, right? So not aerobic
mhm,
exercise. So glucose is your primary fuel source. It goes through glycolysis, byproducts, pyruvic acid and lactic acid, realistically, pyruvate and lactate, right? And because when they bind in the fluid, just to make things simple, they decrease the pH around them, right? So you get an acidic effect. But when we go into the citric acid cycle, also known as the Krebs cycle, that process is very complicated, as you can see.
yes, this is the witchcraft stuff that makes my eyes glaze over and I fall asleep.
Okay,
Um,
so this, if you're in a microbiology class, you would have to memorize every single one of
okay.
those enzymes and steps and put it on a paper full of lines. But when I got into physiology, they said, well, that's all well and good, but the rate limiting factor is X, and that's the only one you have to remember by name. And so phosphofructokinase is an enzyme that goes in there and plugs into that. And the reason it's the rate limiting factor is because as the pH of your blood becomes more acidic, it actually through a binding process reduces the activation of PFK. So PFK is no longer available to go into that cycle. So the whole energy system is cut off. It's like throwing a monkey wrench in the assembly line, or I guess pulling a lever in the assembly line, and it just shuts off until the blood acid level gets back to a more normal pH. All right. So what he was talking about was because the capillaries were compromised, that clearance process of the lactate and the pyruvate is compromised. And if we want a visual of how that kind of looks, we'll go back to this is a capillary, and those are red blood cells. Not a whole lot of room there. They're basically going through single file. So if something happens, even minutely, and I think, was he talking about blood clots there or coagulation? I believe he was
Yes,
talking about
yes.
clots and coagulation. So
Clots and coagulation from unspecified things that may or may not have been introduced into your body.
yeah, and he was talking about how little of an effect you have to have. And
Hmm.
this is where a visual like this would have come into play, because you don't need you need something probably a 20th the size of any one of those cells to be deposited there. And I think he did talk about myocytes depositing on the cell wall, which is something that we have seen with spike, right? And so just think of like a pimple sticking out of one of those pieces of the
Or
cell wall.
careful there. We don't know where this came from. As the drinker would say, unspecified virus of unknown origin.
Well, but this can be from virus or inoculation too,
Hmm.
as
Well,
long
but
as spike is present in your bloodstream.
also is kind of the kind of what he was saying, but not saying, is that in a in an unconditioned person, you have, as he put it, low exercise tolerance. And what that means, with the witchcraft part of it, is the clearing cycle to get that pyruvate and lactate out of there, and then recycle it and turn it into other stuff, which is part of the energy mumbo jumbo cycle. Your body's just not very efficient at that because it's not used to that, because it
So you
doesn't
usually
do it
burn
very
out before
much.
you burn out.
So you
Is
burn
it?
out before you burn out.
Yeah.
But or in previously uh higher level athletic type people, or straight up professional athletes, as we're kind of seeing, if some other mechanism comes in to interrupt or restrict that cycle, even though they're high level athletes, all of a sudden they start gassing out, a quarter of the way through their usual workout. And it,
and
and it,
and flow is important, because the more flow you have, I mean, these walls, the cell walls here, basically it's a diffusion process. So you see the in this map here, the red blood cell, that's hemoglobin, this red blood cell is flowing through there, and when it's red, that means it has oxygen. Basically, our body is just rusty water. All right. So there's iron in that cell that attaches to the oxygen, and there's an affinity for that iron to that oxygen. But when it gets to a point where there is a cell that's being innervated by this capillary that needs the oxygen, well, you're going to have a negative pressure. And so the diffusion process pulls that oxygen from that cell that's already attached to it to the other place that has a greater need, has a greater affinity to it, because it's basically thirsting for it.
mm,
And the more of those cells you can get through there, as we see their single file here, the more of those you can get through there, the faster that happens. Well, the other thing happens on the other way around, when you see carbon dioxide in wastes being also lactate and pyruvate, right? So carbon dioxide goes out, wastes go out, and carbon dioxide is not oxygen, so or pure oxygen, so it doesn't turn it red. It goes out and then goes to your lungs, and we expel it. Most of our breathing is actually getting rid of carbon dioxide, not bringing in oxygen. We typically actually don't have an oxygen debt, so to speak. there is a thing called that, but that's that's down the road. That's not normal activity or even regular exercise activity. But we got to expel that carbon dioxide and get rid of those wastes, or else we become we become too acidic and we will die, right? So we have a shutoff valve within the cells, within that Krebs cycle, that says we're going to, if the blood becomes, or the area around this becomes too acidic, it's just going to shut everything off. Well, now we're talking performance. Your muscle just doesn't work. It's just done. It's not going to work until that pH level gets back to normal, or at least close enough that that enzyme starts being released again to allow for energy production. Now, in the long run, if we're doing aerobic exercise, it doesn't create the acid byproduct, so we can go longer. But if we're talking something like football or tennis or something with short bouts of energy production, just run as fast as you can for as long as you can, and that burn comes up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is going to be something that limits performance.
And then how quickly that is cleared away, because the Krebs cycle there, that can actually be timed, right? Like there's
30 seconds to 3 minutes.
So there's kind of a set amount of time of that lactate being cleared out. But I thought part of the Krebs cycle was that lactate then being recycled, being used as part of the energy process.
That's the Cori cycle that happens in your liver.
Okay.
So it's expelled from the cell, goes into the bloodstream, eventually ends up in the liver. So lots of thousands of enzymes shuttle it in the right direction, ends up in the liver, goes through another process, and actually more energy is made from it through the Cori cycle. So now you can become more efficient at that. And part of that is capillary density. So now you have more avenues going through, more streets going through the city, right? So more clearance. I'm an anaerobic machine. My strength is anaerobic endurance. And that may be nature, that may be nurture. I may have a genetic propensity, but also I spent 25 years of my life with poor blood flow because of the heart issues. And then with one overnight surgery, I had it all opened up, and all of a sudden I could wrestle for hours, right? So it could be nature, nurture, but I'm an anaerobic machine because I can clear lactic acid like crazy. But I suck aerobically. So it might be training. There are training specific ways to do that. And part of that is capillary density. You just have more of those roads. You have more of those that more diffusion going along there. So it's a lot of interplay, but I didn't see anything he said was wrong, because now, okay, so if you have more roads, you're going to have higher clearance. But if some of those roads are clogged, then you're going to have issues, especially if those roads are on the heart muscle itself. That's what a heart attack is plaque building up and making it hard for those red blood cells to get through there. So therefore that heart muscle doesn't get the oxygen it needs, and eventually that tissue dies, which is a heart attack, right? Now, the other thing he talked about is semi-separate from this, even though it's the cardiovascular system. He was talking about the sudden death. So that's completely separate from the performance issues. The performance issues was an energy system thing. You're not going to really die from that unless again it's not on the heart muscle itself. You're not going to, or in the brain itself. One of those two things could be an issue. But when you're talking muscular performance, you basically just get too acidic too fast and everything shuts off. But on the sudden death side, he was talking about scar tissue from the myocarditis. And it was twofold. And I think he could have gone in more into this, but he did say, I'm not the cardiologist here, talk to McCullough or somebody like that along the way. But if that scar tissue is centralized somewhere around the AV node, and they were talking about HRV, heart rate variability, well, now we've got differences in time between the different peaks and valleys in the heart rhythm. Remember when we did the commotio cordis episode?
Yes. Yeah.
And there was that nice little PQRS peak
The
rhythm.
Yeah.
And it said if the hit happens right here, that's when this happens. Well, with decrease in heart rate variability, you can extend those windows where something wrong could happen. And if you're exerting yourself, you're always putting yourself at a little bit of risk of a rhythm issue, because you're stimulating the vagus nerve, which runs right over the heart, because it has to, because your heart rate has to increase when the lion jumps out of the bushes and you have to run away. So you're
Yeah.
stimulating the vagus nerve. And if it hits at just the wrong part of that rhythm, it can send you into ventricular fibrillation, and then you die. Right. So that's the other. There was two separate conversations that he kind of blended together in. But I think it was it was only a 30-minute interview, right? It was all,
Yeah. Yeah.
everything was so condensed.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah. And even so condensed, he still got in the weeds a little bit because of where his brain is compared to normal people.
well, and this is a consideration. So the AV node is somewhat is pretty proximal to your aortic valve, and I have an aortic valve issue, so I am actually prone to ventricular fibrillations if the atrium fibrillates. So I actually have to be on point with that all the time, and that's why I originally went in for that ablation. Turned out to not help much, but that was the reasoning behind it. Atrial fibrillation, annoying, but it won't kill you. But if you're prone to having a signal issue in between the atria and the ventricle, well, now you pretty much could die every time you AFib'd. And so that node, if there's any kind of damage around it, mine is genetic. Mine, I was born with it. But if you had a myocarditis issue, or even the capillary issue where tissue would die around that node, if you use steroids all your life and your ventricle actually hypertrophied, so it's the muscle is thicker and it throws off the signal, all of these things can lead you to be more likely to have that transfer from the top end, which we naturally kind of have these fibrillations just because of life and stress, and the human body is not perfect, to the bottom part, which is essential to stay alive. And then you go tachycardia, and your heart is pumping so fast you don't get any blood. Take one of those squeezy air pressure things and just squeeze it as fast as you can. You don't get air blowing out the other end because it can't refill.
Yeah.
And so that's basically what happens, and that's where the scar tissue comes in. And it could be completely random. You could have scar tissue on your heart and never know it.
Well, and
Maybe, yeah, but if it's
and
central to the electric system, then
that
you're
was where he was hypothesizing of, and this was the frustrating thing to me about that interview. And that same week, Dr. McCullough was on with Daniel Horowitz on his podcast, and he was kind of repeating this too, although he did cite a lot of sources, but there were a lot of times where he said, well, we don't know because the research just isn't being done.
Yeah.
So I can hypothesize, I can throw out a hypothesis that I think makes sense based on what we do know, but this research isn't being done. So we don't know for sure of this might be why people are dying suddenly. And I think it Malone or McCullough, I can't remember because I listened to it back to back. Was it Malone who also talked about, yeah, because, and this was weird to me, of why people were dying in their sleep, or athletes dropping down while they were engaged in high intensity athletics. And it seems completely counterintuitive because those seem like polar opposites, but what's happening in your heart is surprisingly similar, right? I think that's kind of what he was saying of the stress, so to speak, of what's happening to your heart. And so then all of a sudden it can't work.
I don't know, because I'm thinking of my situation, and I actually have more troubles at rest than I do at high activity, but that's because I have a lot of regurgitation. So the valve doesn't close all the way. So when the heart opens back up, some flows back in versus new blood coming in just the other direction every time because the valves are working properly. So I have a lot more trouble at rest than I do at high activity because you lower diastole the faster your heart's pumping. But
so it might be two different mechanisms that are happening.
So yeah, there might be a different mechanism here. Maybe the stress from feeling the poor blood flow kicks me into a different rhythm when I'm at low heart rate. I'm speculating here. Whereas we would have to speculate about the sleep because you're basically becoming parasympathetic, or else you would be awake and aware, right? But
Yeah.
we do have different sleep cycles, and if you were to say have, I don't know, a nightmarish event during deep sleep, I could see that kicking your parasympathetic or your sympathetic nervous system into action, because unlike the REM sleep where you have the weird dreams, you have the weird dreams because all of your fear mechanisms, your the part of your brain that says I'm in danger is turned off. So basically anything goes. So you can have the weirdest dreams possible, and it's like a normal day. Whereas if you several things could happen if you have that same dream state in deep sleep that's not turned off. So that's where one of the places our worst nightmares come from.
Mm.
But also, if you're in a REM sleep and you're having this crazy, wicked dream, and you have a delay between waking up and being in the dream state, all of that kicks on at once. And your brain just shoots you full of epinephrine, so which is adrenaline. Because the delay between the dream state and the waking state, your body is behind the chemicals that are being released. You could be waking up from a weird dream that turned into a nightmare because you're slightly awake now, that basically shot you full of chemicals that cause your heart to come out of rhythm. We'll never know because these people die in their sleep. We can't interview them.
Mm-hmm.
Were you having a nightmare at this time? Or maybe they were caught in that sleep paralysis moment, which if anybody's ever had that is stressful.
Creepy.
That is creepy and stressful. So we will never know because they're dead, right? So all of these things could throw your heart rhythm off because that vagus nerve is firing off. They could have been suddenly awakened from something and died in that fear state you have, like
that split
something
second before you're
crashed on the
fully
door.
conscious. Yeah.
And you just wake up and you have that moment of what the hell, but you're out of breath. If you've ever had that, something crashes and wakes you up, you're out of breath for about a minute, right? So we'll never know because they're unless you have people that you've been monitoring their sleep and you can see what phase of sleep they're in. Maybe some of these fancy watches, if they're wearing one while they're sleeping, I track my sleep cycles. Maybe enough people wearing those die suddenly in their sleep and we can pinpoint this, but it's not really a study you can ethically do prospectively. You could do it reflectively, but not prospectively. Be a little unethical. That's all speculative, by the way. No medical advice given. Look.
Yeah, because we'll never know because they were asleep. We'll also never know because no one's doing this research. Remember, like a year ago, all of a sudden we've all heard of SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, SAD, sudden adult death syndrome. Who knows? It's curious, and no one's really looking into what's going on here. Like we have with SIDS for a while, and I think they've kind of sort of maybe figured out what causes that. Anyway, it reminded me of something insane that happened on the Canadian broadcasting network. So I'm reading from an article here because I don't want to play the clip because it will hurt my brain. On Wednesday, Canadian Dr. Raj Bhardwaj, a family physician and urgent care doctor, according to the CBC, said that everyone should get ready for, quote, stroke season, which now apparently comes after flu season. Bhardwaj said to CBC's Rob Brown, I didn't know about this either until last year. What was happening last year? But it turns out that after flu season, about 3 or 4 weeks later, there is a stroke season. And like you said, most of Canada is getting down off a big hump of flu. So now we're starting to see more strokes. And a friend of one of my colleagues actually mentioned that at work the other day. So if you noticed how many strokes we're seeing, it's a lot more than usual, it feels like, Bhardwaj added. So anecdotally, we're starting to see it. Did you know there was a stroke season?
Well, yes, not specific to stroke, but looking for the original here.
The the point being, there has been a jump in stroke, among other things, in the past couple of years for unknown reasons. Much like the excess deaths, who the hell knows? Could be
Hold on.
anything, but we're
It
not
could be
allowed to
anything, but
look.
we've known about this since 1987, at least, because that's when this paper was published.
Hmm. Interesting.
Interesting that all major viruses that will mess you up in the short term have long-term lingering effects.
And Dr. Malone did go into that in a fair bit of detail because that, as an epidemiologist, that is something he's more expert on, is what the and this is something I first heard, I think in 2020 is when I first discovered Dr. McCullough in the summer of 2020. And he's the first one I heard say this, that the spike itself is toxic. So what happens if you prompt the body to create it? Or what happens if you introduce a synthetic version of it?
That's what I was going to say. I think the synthetic part of it is the worst. The two things that seem to be coming to the forefront in everything I look at is that synthetic part of it, which causes it to last longer in the body, and the lipid nanoparticle capsule that gives it an affinity to almost every part of the body. Because remember, that technology was developed for cancers, and you want your intervention to be
Mhm.
readily accepted by those cells. And cancers are hyperactive cells, right? So hyperactive cells are going to be more likely to have the replication process, as we talked about a couple times ago. Uh, so yeah, I'm going to leave it there to keep us from getting this
Yeah.
video
Well,
removed. But
let's I didn't mean to, it just I was reminded that I wanted to talk about lactic acid because of the interview with
yeah,
Dr. Malone because he brought it up.
yeah, let me just summarize to close this part of it up. If something such as spike was to be circulating in your myocytes, they could have an affinity for that cell wall and cause inflammation, and even similar to diabetes, inflammation of the blood vessels inside with diabetes that narrows that gap, and it prevents those red blood cells from efficiently moving through. So you got a bunch of traffic jams. And so, the logistical issues of traffic jams is the same as in your blood. You're not clearing out the
Mhm.
byproducts of these energy systems. And when that happens, you just are less efficient in it. And if you're a high performing athlete, it's going to be very obvious when you have a delay in that system.
Yeah.
A normal everyday person sitting on the couch, you're not going to obviously notice these effects. But if you're a high performing athlete and you know what you can do, these real serious athletes have a lot of their day and the parameters around their day micromanaged to a T. Is especially the best of the best. So you'll notice.
Mhm. Yeah. Uh, so for the regular person also, that's why, you know, as you've talked about, this is just kind of more the granular detail of why you do all of the parts of fitness. You don't ignore the aerobic, even if you're not an aerobic athlete, even if you're more interested in, the weightlifting side, you still need that aerobic, you still need the muscular endurance because it's all part of this energy system that cycles through, and you want to work all of those systems, especially if you're a normal person. And then it's also why you hear fitness people give the caveat of, consult your physician before you begin an exercise regime because, yeah, especially when you're talking about heart stuff, is even setting aside the unknown virus of unspecified origin. If you have a family history, then it might be your heart might be a ticking time bomb, and you need to check that out because everything could feel fine, but maybe that's just because you haven't stressed it.
Mhm.
That's why we talk a lot about controlled stress. That's the point of what was it? How is it one of your clients put it about appropriately uncomfortable, or
Uh,
that we
we
want to
named an
make,
episode after that.
yeah, we
Appropriately really difficult, I think it was
appropriately
something.
really difficult,
Yeah.
because the idea is to stress you under controlled circumstances so that in real life, when you are stressed in an uncontrolled, unexpected way, your body can handle it.
Yeah, and I would say this is a luxury, but it's really not that expensive. You can find your local university, and if it's one that has an exercise lab, uh, usually for less than $100, you can get a full work through your VO2 max, your body weight density, so your actual fat levels
Yeah.
versus just guessing, and weight, strength tests. A lot of them will run a full gamut, but you can get a VO2 max test or something along those lines and see where you stand. Uh, so I'm wanting to say, unless the price has just shot up, you could do it for less than $100 before, because
Yeah.
a lot of times these universities are using that as a practice tool
Yeah.
for their students. So you go in and you pay a small fee. The student has basically a lesson in real life, and it's supervised by the proctors, the professors. So you can get workups like that if you have a university in the area. It's just like going to the hairdresser school to get a cheaper haircut, right?
Go get a
Yeah,
$2 haircut at the
yeah,
cosmetology school. Yeah.
exactly. Because you can use this as a learning process for these people, uh, and so
Chuck did that. Chuck did that once on the south side of San Antonio, in the whichever side it was that was the black side, not the Hispanic side of 87 there. And so none of them knew how to cut a white person's hair. So the instructor had to come over and teach them how to cut a white person's hair.
uh, we're going back to when I said I'm an anaerobic machine. I know that from sports I have an affinity to, but I also know that from testing in the lab. When I do my VO2 max test, my VO2 is, it's decent. It's like 40, 45, which, it'll get you through the day.
Mhm.
But my R value, which is the amount of carbon dioxide you're pumping out versus oxygen you're taking in,
Yeah.
is half again more than most people can tolerate
Clearing that
before.
waste so that the cycle can get going and replenish. Yeah.
Yeah, I can sit at max VO2 for like 10 minutes because I'm pumping this other system that my body's really good at.
Mhm.
It sucks, it's painful, but I can do it.
All right. Well, we this episode has been a downer, so let's finish with what I said I was going to ambush you with.
Okay,
I sent you
let
the
me take
link in the chat.
let me take a bathroom break, and then we'll.
All right.
Okay, so I saw it was a Rumble video. Nothing that's going to get
Uh-huh.
us banned, right?
No, I'm just trying to get out of the habit of using YouTube when somebody has a Rumble page. I need to actually unsubscribe on YouTube for the people that also are on Rumble so I can stop watching on YouTube, just on general principle.
Okay, so this is semi a blind reaction. Oh, JP Sears. Okay.
I love this guy because when he's in character, he's a long-haired hippie soy boy, but he's actually jacked.
Okay, so how long is this? Do you want me to play the whole thing?
Just watch as much of it as you want to and pause and react as you feel like.
Oh, sorry for the ad. There we go.
That's all right. Oh, you didn't share with sound.
Oh,
And the main point about this video is it makes me really jealous of his setup there.
well,
I want
he does have some money.
I want a barn that's a gym.
Well, so do I. But so when we bought this house, there's a little landing strip nearby, and there was a house for sale with a hangar in the back, and we were going to
Oh,
convert that
nice.
hangar into a gym. And we just did. The house was a little older, and the hangar we would have needed to run plumbing and electric
Uh,
through. So it put the price tag just a little bit beyond what we could do
That
reasonably.
the extra money that would have been involved in the renovation just wasn't worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a bummer.
Yeah. But yeah, that was the original plan. But I think we're doing well with the garage.
Hmm.
What's the most effective workout for real men? Now, I'll get to that in a second, but first, you might think you're a real man, but if you're not insecure enough to be constantly working out to build muscle and get leaner, then biologically speaking, you're not a real man.
Say they say once you start weightlifting, you will forever be too small.
Yeah. Or as the
But you know what? I see this with women too. The women that get into
Yeah.
that really get into it, not just the soccer moms that have it on their bucket list, but the women that really get into it. That this is why that drift towards the not so natural becomes a natural process. Watched it happen in real time, and now you see them, and you're like, damn, she's more jacked than I am, but she's still not big enough in her own eyes. And dysmorphia happens, and we all have our propensity to it in our heads.
Now, the Brotherhood of Manhood has always known that building muscle to create the external appearance of strength in order to mask your inner weaknesses is the only way to become a stronger man. So, unless you want your scrotum to become nothing other than a leather purse to hold your ovaries, you better be working out. So, to help you do it, today's lesson is on how to work out like a real man, starting with man workout principles. Now, the last thing you want.
Oh, we're
leather purse to hold your ovaries. I got to remember that one.
Oh gosh. Okay, so let's go into these principles here.
What you want to do is start working out without a solid grasp of scientific principles of exercise. So, the 4 most important workout principles are: if it hurts, it's good for you. If it doesn't hurt, then it's bad for you. If you don't injure you.
Oh, I hate sayings like
Yeah.
no pain, no gain, or pain is weakness leaving the body. I hate those because pain is a signal.
Yeah.
It's not always something you have to bow to, but at the same time, it's a signal and you need to evaluate the situation.
So I saw a shirt that made me go, okay, there is an exception to every rule, because it was pain is weakness leaving the body, and it was USMC, United States Marine Corps. It was like, okay, there's the exception for that particular rule, because you're not training for real life.
Yeah, but that's just like I talk about, sport isn't always healthy, but you're transferring the sport to the general public in the name of health.
Yes.
Bodybuilding is chemically enhanced and it's not healthy. You will die. They do die frequently and young, but it is the face of the fitness industry. David Goggins, this is my beef with him. Yeah, you have to embrace the suck sometimes. I get that, and I agree with you. But his knees are shot, and he blames it on a genetic condition. But even with the genetic condition, there were modalities of training he could have done to not blow his knees up. And you know, he's a special mentality. He would probably not be happy unless he did these things to his body. But when we're talking about everybody in the world and making the world a healthier, happier place, guess what? Embracing the suck has different meanings. It just means doing what you have to do. And
it means I don't feel like going to the gym. Well, suck it up, buttercup, and go. It doesn't mean, man, my back hurts. Embrace the suck and do 3 more reps of that deadlift. No.
and end up in a wheelchair like Ronnie Coleman, right?
You're done.
You know, but also, I would challenge him to say, you know what? Embrace the suck of taking a step back. You're addicted to this feeling, my friend.
Yeah.
If you were to take a step back to get healthier and do things the right way, I bet you that would suck. It's a different kind of suck.
I hate doing single leg RDLs and Bulgarian squats because they're hard, but I know I need them. I'd rather just do more heavy deadlifts and squats, but I need the other stuff.
Now I know he's joking here, so we can
Yes.
talk like this, but
yourself at least once a month, then you're not working out hard enough.
wait,
And
I missed what he
finally,
said right before that. Hold on.
callus, it's good for you. If it doesn't hurt, then it's bad for you. If you don't injure yourself at least once a month, then you're not working
CrossFit
out
model.
hard enough. And finally, calluses matter. I don't even know what this is for. Now, nothing will make you look like more of a beta male who's probably definitely a female than having small legs. But in the fitness world, for the longest time, a lot of men didn't train legs because it wasn't discovered until the 1990s that men do in fact have legs and therefore should train them. So for big strong legs, squats are your go-to because no other exercise puts your back more at risk. Can you frame this so they can't say I don't have any weight?
Which is funny because we had that bro science episode,
Yeah.
and it was is squats the king of leg exercises. I don't agree with that because of the back, right? I can actually get more work out of your legs with a split squat or a Bulgarian split squat or a single leg version of that lunges. Lunges are probably my king of leg exercises. And now there's a time and a reason to load your spine because you need your back to be strong, but it's not the king of exercises. It's just an exercise. Now, systemically, it's one of the kings of exercise, but for your legs, not so much.
On the bar? Yep. Now, when doing squats, some men choose to use a rolled up towel on the bar for comfort, but this is nothing other than a tampon for your upper back. And real men don't use tampons.
Okay, that being said, every once in a while I'll put the towel on the bar because I'm sweating like freaking crazy and the bar wants to slip down your back.
I don't like it because I can't get a good position with that tampon on there. I can't
That's
get
because you need better
placed
external
right.
rotation in your shoulders, but
That too. Yeah, well, I mean that's why I got a safety squat bar. Yeah.
Now, pull-ups are an excellent exercise to build a real man's physique because you saw Rocky Balboa doing them in Rocky IV. Strict form is essential, but if there's no one around to watch you, erratic form that makes you look like an epileptic BDSM practitioner is recommended because you'll be able to do more reps. Kettlebells are a staple of exercise equipment for real men because gravity affects them, making them basically no different than any other weight. Proper kettlebell technique involves a lot of explosiveness and momentum, which means you're not going to build very much muscle with them. Therefore, proper technique isn't recommended.
well, that's one of the reasons they make such a great conditioning tool.
Yeah.
Because I can condition you without doing a whole lot of muscle damage, and we can do it often. If you do kettlebell swings with the right dose, you can pretty much do them every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not all kettlebells are created equally. If your kettlebells have rubber handles or smooth, comfortable grips, you are in fact a woman, and you shouldn't be working out at all because it's time for you to get in the kitchen and start making dinner. Real men only use kettlebells that offer an
I told you not to get us banned here. Oh. Okay, so I guess I have to put the disclaimer. We don't agree with that statement.
He's clearly being ironic.
I
I
know.
remember when we used to be able to make jokes without
Yeah.
disclaimers.
Yeah, but we gotta make the YouTube gods happy.
uncomfortable grip that progressively tears through the skin of your hands. But even better than good kettlebells are kettlebells that have primal looking faces on them. These will be much less practical to use, yet offer a better user experience involving contusions and bruising on your forearms.
So when I did the CrossFit tournament that we entered our people in, they had those gorilla ones.
Yeah.
And yes, they do hurt more hitting your forearms.
Yeah. Yeah. Think all the pointy bits.
And thus making you appear to be more of a real man than you are, which makes you more of a real man. Pro tip! Using chalk is a must because it's a white powder that gets all over everything. It's a man's way of marking his territory in the gym. The correct use of chalk will have you chalking up your heaviest set of kettlebells that you never use, so when your friends come over, they'll think you're actually strong enough to use them. But the joke's on them.
Okay, so if chalk is marking your territory, when I train the pro guys, the baseball guys, Jared and Josh and all of them, they would purposefully chalk up and then grab me in the crotch and slap my ass, and just so I had to change clothes before my next client came in. So
Yep.
Ugh.
Yep.
Good thing I'm not a woman, because I wish I was a woman, because then I'd be rich after that behavior. But maybe I'll identify as trans, and then I can be rich from that behavior.
Yeah, retroactively it works. I'm told that that's how it works. Yeah.
Because f your friends, you're a real man. Question: if a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound?
I appreciate that he's doing battle rope properly. I hate the flail.
Answer: don't go into the woods, because apparently trees are falling down. Likewise, if you're working out at home and no one's around to see you, you're missing out on an opportunity to assert your manhood into the visual field of other people, which makes you less of a man in their eyes. But the remedy for that is for you to spend no less than 1/3 of your workout time setting up your phone on your sissy selfie stick to take videos of yourself working out. Then when you post them on your social media, write an inspirational message or some other kind of BS so they won't know that you're just wanting them to see a video of you working out. And now that you're done working out,
You were trying to read that.
Go back and read that. Yeah.
Deadlifts are clinically proven to protect you against communism. I use a trap bar because it's made in America, and sometimes my back feels like it's made in China. Fitness equals freedom.
inspirational message or some other kind of BS so they won't know that you're just wanting them to see a video of you working out. And now that you're done working out, you need to start recovering from all the hard work that you did your best to appear to do. And that means a protein shake. Nutritionally speaking, miscellaneous powders that taste like chocolate are all you need. You can also choose vanilla flavored protein powders. The only problem with those is they reveal the fact that you have a uterus. So for men, chocolate's your best option. At this point, you should be well versed in how to physically abuse your body in order to frighten it into a muscle growth response, and thus enhancing your real man status for all those who are homoerotic enough to care about how you look. Enjoy being a fitter, more injured individual, both of which make you more of a real man. And stay tuned for our next episode of How to Be a Real Man. But until then, stay chalked up.
Okay.
This just in!
Oh. Interesting.
Surprisingly accurate.
Surprisingly accurate. Yeah, he was being facetious in a lot of arenas that I would.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, he does have a nice setup there.
Yes. I love the irony because it's also kind of teaches a lesson of, I don't remember where I first heard this, but some of the best gym advice I ever heard was form over ego. And that's not just your specific rep form, it's the whole thing. You got me started doing barbell hip thrusts over a decade ago, I think.
Mhm.
And I still get strange looks because, as he pointed out, it wasn't until the 1990s that we knew men actually had legs. It wasn't until just a couple of years ago that we knew those legs actually had glutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's looked at as one of those girly exercises because all the little fitness models trying to get big butts
all
are doing
the
them.
Instagram butt models, that's all they're doing.
Let me see if I can find it real quick, but tell me if this is girly. Fill in the space while I look for this.
Yeah. Well, the easy way I get around this is if somebody actually engages me on it, I tell them to put a bar on their back, just the bar. All right, now do a squat, deep as you can. Stop, hold it right there. Where do you feel it? Same thing with the deadlift. And this was something that I figured out early on from the stuff you exposed me to is, and this is something Brett Contreras talked about a lot, is when you're at the bottom of that squat or deadlift, it's the glutes that are firing. It's the glutes that are going to get you moving because of how the muscles are stretched out and how they're engaged. So,
well, here's the golden rules. It's the furthest joint from the center of mass is the one working the hardest, and the most stretched out muscle in that joint is the one working the hardest. So when you get to the bottom of that squat, if you do it right, you kind of equidistant between the knees and the hips. but at the same time, those glutes are fully stretched out. Here we go.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you can find a lot of that about the bench press. That's been around for a long time of, if you're having trouble getting the bar off your chest, you need to work this. If you're having trouble racking it, you need to work this. And ooh, that's a lot of
Yeah,
weight.
anybody who says hip thrusts are a girl exercise, tell that to Mr. James Harrison, who would murder you.
Oh, geez. How many reps was that?
I think in the full video, he does 8 or 10.
Of 675.
I've done 635
Wow.
myself. So you get a bruise in your pubis if you do that. So don't have a hot date that night.
I use a 1-inch foam pad as my instead of the bar tampon because it fits better. It's more versatile, and I can use it for other things. That was like a 2-inch pad that he had, and that still looked like it would hurt.
Let's see. I wonder how soft I have gotten over the years, because I remember doing this, and it's a itty bitty little pad. If I can find it. Is that it? Yeah, there it is. Now, don't mind that I added the extra toe lift. That's bad form, but it's hard not to do at this time.
Yeah.
So this is 635.
Nice.
But it's just a towel. All I have is a towel.
Ow!
But nowadays I got that big ass pad and I'm still like, ew, it hurts.
One of the best pieces of fitness equipment I ever bought was a 1-inch foam pad. It's like 12 by 18 inches, so it fits perfectly into a gym bag. You can use it when you're doing kneeling stretches. You can use it as a bar pad for hip thrusts. It is very handy. Or I throw it down when I'm doing bench T-spines. Anywho, that was a good way to end. But I guess we did talk about fitness, so this is no direct fitness advice. If you want more fitness stuff, go to our sponsor, Real Fitness and Performance on YouTube. It is my sister station, and actually the one I do for a living. So go check that out. do you have a specific video yet on the witchcraft energy cycle stuff?
No, Energy Cycles is coming soon. I got to do more in-depth into progressive overload first, and I have to do this. I need to release a squat video and a deadlift video, since we're integrating that into the next performance cycles that I put out. So I filmed the squat video and I just wasn't happy with it, because I want it to be about 10 to 15 minutes, so not too long. But there's so much information that has to go into that.
Yeah.
So, and the more I looked at the one I did, I'm like, oh, God, no, I need this here, and I need to cut that out. And so that'll be coming out. I have Wednesday to work on it, so that'll be coming out tomorrow, hopefully. And then the next training cycle comes out also this week. And then the educational session on progressive overload and how I do it for every training variable. So we gave the overview. That's already out there. Now we'll actually go into specific examples of how I overload intensity, or how I overload rest, because you reduce rest, or you manipulate, how I manipulate these different things to get the overload that I want. So that's going to be an interesting one, I think, for the people that are curious about the witchcraft.
All right. Well, y'all check that out. And I keep meaning to dig into those, and I keep forgetting, because I think it would be good, cross-pollination.
Well, I'm trying to keep them shorter. I think one ended up about 42 minutes, but the rest are 20-ish minutes or under.
Yeah. And then I can offer the more layman's perspective, because I am not the professor of what you're talking about there.
Now, I did just release one on how to progress body weight exercises, which is something people have trouble with. Because, like a dumbbell exercise, you can grab the next heaviest dumbbell every time you're ready to progress. With your body weight, you're kind of set in your resistance. So there's different things we can do with, just the natures of physics and leverage and stuff to progress those.
All right. Well, we will see y'all next time. Thursday is more Lord of Chaos. You think we can get through the end of the book?
I think it might be a 2-parter.
Yeah, because the Matt section and then the Rand section, that's
well,
meaty
and we
stuff.
also got to reintroduce Perrin, because He spent
Finally.
a whole book off and then had just a
Finally.
little blurb at the beginning of this one. So
Yep. All right. Well, we'll see y'all next time.
later.